Hi there, it's Matt here, and welcome back to the podcast, and welcome back to another of our AMA episodes, Ask Me Anything episodes. Once again, I am joined by the definitive voice in sleep, the exponentially insightful Dr. Eti Ben Simone. Eti, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Matt. It's great to be here.
Should we just do what we do? Drive straight in or dive straight in? Why don't we dive straight in?
Let's dive straight in. First question. Is it true that sleeping next to your phone can affect your brain waves? My mom keeps sending me articles about this. I like to hear that everybody's mom does that.
Yeah, I know. Oh, I love the fact that your mum does that. And it's born out of a deep desire to just keep you healthy and care for you, as wonderful mums do. But the concern that sleeping near a smartphone and that it disrupts your brain waves or your sleep quality, I would say at best it's probably controversial. There is some scientific basis for it in the literature, and you may know some of this too, Etty, but the electromagnetic fields, or the EMFs, which is sort of the concern that we have with these devices, they do emit, these devices, low levels of radio frequency electromagnetic radiation, which is a very long word, which is simply simplified as RF EMR, radio frequency electromagnetic radiation. And some studies, not all of them, and some have certainly contested this, suggest that those radio frequency EMRs could affect sleep architecture. I think there was a 2007 study that explored exposure to mobile phone radiation before bed. And I think the evidence there, and it was a great team of researchers, it did suggest that it kind of delayed the onset of REM sleep. In other words, it wasn't necessarily that you had less REM sleep overall. It's just that the time it took you to go into your first REM sleep stage was delayed. So it seemed as though the brain was a little bit slower and a bit more lazy before it got to its first REM stage. The other evidence is blue light exposure. More definitively, smartphones, I think, in part really emit blue light, which has certainly been demonstrated to suppress melatonin, certainly demonstrated to disrupt circadian rhythms, and it may lead to poorer quality of sleep. And there was a very famous study coming out of Harvard from Charles Czeisler's group on this. But I've had Michael Gradazar, who is a wonderful sleep researcher in Australia, on my podcast several times now. And I think he's made a very good, compelling case that the blue light from these devices isn't really the concern either. It's the fact that they are attention capture devices, and it causes this hyper overactive brain right before we sleep because they're so engaging, because they're designed to fleece you of your attention economy, and they do it very well, that you have sleep procrastination. So I would say right now, if phones are disrupting your sleep, the evidence is probably more about a little bit about the light that they emit, but also probably just the psychological activating nature of them, than it really is having them sit there all night emitting this very modest amount of radio frequency electromagnetic radiation that is harmful to your brain or harmful to your sleep. Nevertheless, there is still also some evidence that I think people have pointed to that these phones do have an effect. I think there are some, for example, lateralized brain cancers on the right side, because most people would use a phone put up to their dominant ear, and most people are right-handed, and most people are right-eared as a consequence. But again, I think that field is very controversial if you look at it, and there's plenty of argument, sufficient enough argument, I think, that that's not the case. So for me, right now, I love the fact that your mum is so diligent in her continued care and concern for you. I would say at this stage, I don't think there's particularly good evidence that these EMFs are impacting the brain. But we have to always keep in mind as scientists, as we've said on this show before, absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. So right now, I don't think there's evidence that we can say it does, but I don't think there's equally strong evidence that suggests it absolutely doesn't. So jury's out, at least in my mind.
I think the first question I would ask is why would you want to keep your phone open when you're sleeping? What good does that do? I mean, if it doesn't interrupt your brain waves, it most certainly will interrupt your sleep. Wouldn't you say, Matt?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I think these devices, even when we're not using them and the attention capture power, they still have a non conscious psychological weight to them. For me, the concern about people taking their phones into the bedroom, yes, it's about waking up in the middle of the night, turning over and knowing that you can check it and gain access to those anxiogenic triggers of social media and emails. It's also the fact that what do most people do in society when they first wake up in the morning? They reach for their phone and they unlock it. And then this wave of anxiety also washes over you. And so every night, we have been trained by our actions every morning to expect this little mini tsunami of anxiety every morning. And that leads to something called anticipatory anxiety. You're anticipating this waking up the next morning. It's almost like you have to catch that early morning flight. You just know your sleep the night before is not going to be as good. It's going to be shallow because you're so anxious about anticipating that event. Well, a phone repeatedly used in that way is a low grade version of that next day early morning flight. My worry is that it can decrease the amount of deep sleep. There's a great study on this by Torbjörn Ackerstad in Sweden, demonstrating that if you have an event the next day that is of concern or stress, just knowing that it's there the next day dropped the amount of deep sleep that you had during the night. So even though you were non-conscious, you were asleep, the quality of your sleep was impacted by your conscious knowledge of something that happened before sleep, your expectation of what was going to happen the next day. That was quite surprising. Conscious intention or awareness of anxiety when you woke up in the morning could change the non-conscious structure and depth of your sleep at night.
Yeah, there was a study in last year coming from Bjorn Rush's group in Germany. They showed that in a nap as well. If you tell participants that there's something stressful is coming up after the nap, it changes the way their sleep is structured and it impacts deep sleep as well.
Two findings, two different groups, same effect.
Yeah.
Very powerful. Okay, next question.
Speaking of naps, every time I nap on my lunch break, I wake up feeling worse than I did before the nap for a while, but then I get almost a second wind later in the afternoon and feel great. Is it therefore bad to nap?
Yeah, I've done a couple of podcasts on naps before, and I think one of them is called The Art of Napping. And my friend Andrew Huberman always tells me protocolize things, put it in a protocol. Like, what's the protocol for napping? So I would say the protocol for napping is probably the following. Naps can be a double-edged sword. If you're struggling with sleep at night, don't nap during the day. Build up as much healthy sleepiness during the day as you can to weigh you down, to give you the best chance of falling asleep and staying asleep, because that's especially hard for you when you're suffering from insomnia. That said, though, if you can nap and you can nap regularly, naps are just great. We've done lots of studies with them. People have done different dose responses. And here's the following. When you nap longer than 20 or 30 minutes, your brain starts to go down into the deeper stages of non-REM sleep. And when you wake up out of that deep non-REM sleep, let's say after an hour, that's very unusual. Most of us don't wake up after the first hour of sleep from the deeper stages of sleep. You suffer what's called sleep inertia, which most people will know of as a sleep hangover. Just what this person describes. I fell asleep. Maybe I slept for an hour or 40 minutes or 35 minutes. And when I wake up, I feel worse than I did just before the nap. However, once you get past that grogginess, that sleep inertia, and it takes about 15, 20 minutes, depending on how long you've been awake. For some, it may take up to an hour. Then all of a sudden, now not only do you go back to where you were before the nap, you're even better because you've gained the benefits of the longer sleep. But I would say that, to Andrew's point, for the protocol, probably 20-minute naps are the sweet spot. Why? Because a 20-minute nap in terms of the cognitive and emotional benefits that you get. It gives you enough of what you want from a nap, which is really just, I want focus, attention, alertness, energy, and I want the fatigue to be gone. A 20-minute nap will do that. It will reset all of those things. But 20 minutes isn't quite long enough for you to start going down into the very deepest stages of sleep. So you don't have very much of the sleep inertia, but you get at least enough of a nap duration that gives you some benefits. So it's all about a cost-benefit equation. And that's what I'm trying to suggest there. So it's like a classic car engine. After you've napped for about an hour, you've just got to give your brain time, particularly your frontal lobe and your prefrontal cortex. It just takes time, like that engine, to get back up to warm operating temperature. And after that, you can let the pedal out and you can really make it sing. But before that, it's going to be a little bit tough.
So it is therefore not bad to nap, you would say.
It is not bad to nap as long as you're not suffering from insomnia. And then the only other time we see napping as a potential deleterious predictor is in people, and this happens especially in older adults, people who have really bad quality sleep at night, meaning that maybe they're in bed for 9 hours and they're only getting about 6 hours because they're staying awake, or they're forced to be awake because their brain isn't generating sleep that they need. They're awake for so much of the night, the quality of their sleep, because they're awake for 3 out of the 9 hours, which is terrible quality sleep, is so bad that they try to compensate nap during the day. And it's not that the napping during the day, we believe, is detrimental. It's just that the nap, when you ask people, do you nap during the day? And then they say yes, particularly if they're older adults. At that point, it's usually the nap is masquerading as a signal of how bad the quality of their sleep is at night. So it's not that napping, as you're an older individual, let's say, is bad for your health per se. It's just what the need to nap in the middle of the day is telling you about the quality of your sleep the night before. And it's that bad quality of sleep that predicts poor health outcomes. And that's why some people have said, well, if you nap during the day, especially if you're an older adult, it's been associated with these bad health outcomes. So don't nap during the day. I don't think it's as simple as that for the reason I just gave. Does that make some sense?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a marker, basically.
Correct. It's a proxy. It's just simply, a masquerading predictor of something else. It's the something else. That's the reason that correlation is never causation. Just because A predicts B, it doesn't mean that it's A causing B. It's that it could be C that is the problem that is predicting B, and that A and C go hand in hand. So napping could predict bad health outcomes. Napping A, bad health outcomes B. But it turns out that napping is also very correlated with C, which is bad quality of sleep at night. And it's really the bad quality of sleep at night, the C, that is predicting B causally rather than A predicting B. Having just done that, I've thoroughly confused everyone. Let's move on to the next question.
I think it helps, actually.
A partner for today's episode is AG1. I've been using AG1 for quite some time now, and just for the record, I buy it myself to stay away from any of those trappings of free product. AG1 has just released the new formulation, which is AG1 Next Gen. It's still one scoop once a day, but now comes with many upgraded probiotics, plus additional vitamins and minerals. I also explored their 4 human clinical trials to prove out their efficacy, with the data showing a marked boost in healthy gut bacteria. And that's the thing. I appreciate how AG1 keeps adapting to new scientific findings. They have made many formula changes over the years, and each new iteration keeps it at the cutting edge of this space. As I've mentioned, I began my AG1 journey over 4 years ago. Any company that holds their scientific rigor to the flames of clinical trials means a lot to me. So subscribe today to try the next gen of AG1. If you use the following link, you'll also get a free bottle of AGD 3K2, as well as an AG1 welcome kit
and 5 of the upgraded AG1 travel packs with your first order. So make sure to check out drinkag1.com/mattwalker. That's drinkag1.com/mattwalker.
All right, next question. This is going to sound odd, but I think I've noticed that my insomnia gets worse during the full moon. Am I imagining this connection as my boyfriend thinks I am, or is it real?
Your boyfriend tonight should pack up his suitcase, leave immediately. You are flagrantly No, don't worry. You're not imagining it. There is actually some scientific evidence, and I'm going to put an asterisk here, that the full moon can affect sleep quality, and the exact mechanism is debated. There was an initial study from a group that I respect enormously, led by Dirk-Jan Dijk in the UK at Surrey University. And they did find these really robust, statistically significant effects of sleep quality being worse right around the full moon. Considering, by the way, we know that sleep is associated with emotional regulation. And you've heard of the idea of lunacy or lunatic. If you think about the etymology of that word, where is that coming from? It's the idea that right around the full moon, everyone gets a little bit wacky and crazy. And one explanation is because during the full moon, we get less sleep, we become more emotionally unstable, and hence we become more lunatic-like in our nature. It was a very interesting theory, and the data started to support that. Then another study was published, and again, I'm blanking on the name here, but they showed that it wasn't quite that simple, that the effects on men and women of the lunar cycle was different. So in women, I think it may have had a detrimental impact on deep, slow wave sleep, whereas in men, it had a beneficial impact on the amount of REM sleep. But then there was another study that looked at data which was far greater in participant number. These were thousands of people. Those other studies were done on many tens of people, maybe a couple of hundred people. Then another big study looked at a much larger data set of thousands of individuals, and they could not reproduce this effect whatsoever. They could not find any statistically significant effects on the basis of the lunar cycle. So I would say right now, we don't believe that there is a particularly robust effect. I think it may be an effect that is present in some. Why is that? Why is that the case? Well, some people have argued that the luminance of the full moon and even the sky when it's cloudy, nevertheless, with a full moon, means that that increased light level when we are typically expecting darkness prevents the normal amount of release of melatonin. When darkness happens, we release melatonin. That's why we need darkness at night and why we may not be sleeping so well at night, because we are a dark deprived society in this modern era. But the lunar cycle changes that we may be exposed to higher levels of light at night through the full moon, and that may disrupt our sleep because of its disruption of melatonin. That's at least the leading theory, should we still believe in the lunar effect on sleep.
I think we've discussed this in one AMA before, that in the Jewish tradition, and I think also in Muslim traditions that actually follow the moon, a lot of the main holidays are linked to full moon. So people had light during their celebrations. So it's definitely an option that this excessive light changes anything. But I kind of wonder if with artificial light, how much do we really sense that anymore?
It's very true that there may, in fact, be an incredibly robust effect of the lunar cycle, but it's so smeared and filtered
Yeah.
and contorted that no wonder we don't see it, because none of us are really sleeping in tents or outside in the open. So maybe the real study would be that people should take them to places where you sleep outside, or you're still at least exposed, because it's not really about sleeping with your eyes closed and the moon being there. It's really about the exposure to that increased light during the dark phases when you're still awake that we believe causes the sleep disruption. Ken Wright has done some great studies looking at when he takes people camping out in the Rockies, the Colorado Rockies. And you can see some really fascinating innate traits of human sleep because you dislocate people from so much of what modernity pollutes our sleep with that, you could argue our baseline studies of sleep in our lab are not really baseline. We're taking that person and then we do an experimental manipulation and we have them sleep a second time. So whatever the baseline is, our experimental manipulation is about the change from that baseline. But baseline for them may not really be baseline for us, Homo sapiens. And to do that, we would probably have to take ourselves back to an agrarian way of life, not an industrial, electrified way of life. And only then can you truly reveal how we, Homo sapiens, slept innately. So maybe the answer lies there. Great point. Great point.
Yeah, and maybe just sleeping next to the Rockies when I was hiking there, I slept so well.
So many people tell me that. And I think some
Really?
of that is just because you are de-stressing from the world and your troubles and your worries are a little bit further behind you and you don't
And
have
you're
to wake up for
active.
work and you're active. You're getting sunlight during the day. You're getting true darkness at night. And so I think it's a combination of psychological, environmental, and biological.
And the sheer awe of the Rocky Mountains.
Yeah. Oh gosh, doesn't it take your breath away?
It does.
So, okay, next question.
Next question. Why do I sometimes wake up and feel completely paralyzed? It's terrifying.
Ah, good question. And it has a very clear, unlike the lunar cycle,
Mm.
has a very clear answer. The paralysis we spoke about, I think we even spoke about it on our last AMA. When you go into sleep, normally in the light stages of non REM and then the deeper stages of non REM, your muscle tone starts to relax. You become just more relaxed as an individual, but you still have some muscle tone present. When you go into REM sleep, however, your brain will paralyze your body. It sends a signal down the spinal cord to what we call the alpha motor neurons in your spinal cord, and they control all of your voluntary muscles. So, the muscles when you reach for a glass, or when you decide to blink, or you decide to articulate speech, or you swing a tennis racket, they are all voluntary muscles. All of those are paralyzed during REM sleep. And why is this the case? Well, if you think about it, when we're in REM sleep, we dream. And sometimes we dream about doing some really remarkable things, like me opening up my window and jumping out the window and starting to fly. Well, you would be popped out of the gene pool impressively quickly if you started to act out all of your dreams as a species. And the brain figured this out. So it put in place this safety net of dream sleep paralysis. Are paralyzed, you're locked into your body from your voluntary muscle perspective so that your mind can dream and dream in a safe way where you stay in bed. You don't dive out the window because it's dark and you're not perceiving the outside world. So I would say that that is a completely normal physiological process. But sometimes when you wake up, the paralysis remains. And this happens often when people are sometimes sleep deprived or they're sleeping later into the morning. Now, when most of us wake up in the morning hours, we're waking up either from light non REM sleep or from dream sleep, this REM sleep. And therefore, it means that if you're waking up out of dream sleep, you're waking up out of the paralysis state. For most of us, as we're starting to wake up and consciousness starts to reemerge into our mind, so too is the release of the paralysis of our body from our brain's signaling of that paralysis. So normally those two things go lockstep. In fact, if anything, the paralysis release, the release of the paralysis is just at the leading edge. So as you're starting to regain waking consciousness, you are regaining it at a speed that your body is letting go of that paralysis so that you can move normally. And you never even think about it. Every now and again, however, that paralysis falls behind in terms of its release. And so your body is still locked into the paralysis of REM sleep, but you are consciously starting to wake up. What that means is that you can't lift your eyelids, you can't speak, you can't shout, you can't move. And often people have this experience, this REM sleep paralysis experience upon awakening, and they feel quite anxious about it, as you would do. And people often then think there's an intruder in the room. It turns out that REM sleep paralysis, and oh gosh, I'll remember her name in a second, at Harvard University, has done some great studies on this. REM sleep paralysis accurately explains most, if not all, alien abduction stories. Because when was the last time that you heard this on the news on CNN? But it said, yesterday in Delaware at a boardroom meeting, James Jackson, all of a sudden at 1 p.m. in the afternoon, after lunch had finished, was whooshed away by aliens. And we all saw it. It never happens like that. What happens is that people will say, it was at night, I was in bed, they injected me with some paralyzing agent, I couldn't fight back, I couldn't move, there was a sense of a presence of something there in the room with me. This is just the natural state of REM sleep paralysis. I would say that it's common. How common is it? About 25% of the population will experience REM sleep paralysis at some moment in time, which means it's about as common as hiccups. So you really don't have to worry. If it's happening very frequently, it may just be that you are maybe a little bit too sleep deprived, or your anxiety levels are high. That's also associated with it too. But for the most part, if it's not causing you any problems or concerns and you now understand it, it's not some demon that's inside of you that needs to be excised, which was sometimes common in the very, very old Catholic tradition, then the incubus and the succubus on people's chests, that was the idea of the paralysis, then for the most part, no, you're just fine. It's just one of those things. Anything to add there, Eti?
Actually, one of my earliest memories, I think I was 11 or 10. I don't have a lot of childhood memories that are that vivid, was waking up in my bed and not being able to move at all. And I remember intensely looking at my finger and trying to move it just a little bit, just so I can feel like something is still working, because I was terrified that I'd lost the ability to move. And I think it was only a few seconds, but it felt like forever. And I still remember it so many years after. It is a very scary experience the first time it happens to you.
Especially
And
if you're a child who, doesn't
especially as a
understand
child,
that.
yeah.
And even adults, no one talks about this really. So it's great that we're bringing awareness to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to offer maybe a crazy theory that perhaps we first of all had to have the muscles paralyzed as part of our ability to restore them. And then the brain realized that it can just do what it wants because the body's out of commission at that point. It's just something I think about a lot.
Say more about that. That's a slightly reverse logic than the one that many people would ascribe to, but it's a very
Yeah,
interesting one.
yeah. We often think that we paralyze the muscles in order to dream, but it is just as likely possible that the body needs to really plug out the muscular system during sleep in order to repair and restore. And when the brain realized that we can do anything, there's no consequences, actually dreams kind of started being more motor and more immersive. That's just an idea.
It's a very good idea. And folks, you can see how this sort of counterfactual thinking, which is the type of thinking that usually leads to marked breakthroughs in, many fields, science included, is such an incredible virtue. And you can see why it's such a gift to have Dr. Eti Ben Simone.
You're too kind.
One of these days, I've always wanted to, based on how wonderfully you think in those contrarian ways, and stick with me here, I've wanted to put you in a cardboard box. And then I've wanted to ask you, can you add 2 and 2 together and give me the answer? Because it would be, to me, the first demonstration for you and the rest of us at the Sleep Center of you thinking inside. Okay,
That's a brilliant experiment. We should do it.
please do. So for, oh gosh, it must be at least a decade now, I have been an avid, probably more like rabid consumer of protein shakes. But the hard thing, honestly, in the supplement space, if you really understand and do your diligence, is this critical thing called trust. It is very hard to find a brand that you can truly trust. That's when I came across the company Puri and the really impressive founder. Even though I'm sure it makes them less profit versus other quick and loose companies, Puri takes quality more seriously than any company I've ever seen before.
They have so many offerings, gosh, protein powders galore, but lots of other additions. But that's what I was focusing on here. Why did I choose them? Well, it's really for 4 specific reasons. Number 1, they are free from hormones. Number 2, they are free from GMOs. Number 3, they are free of any pesticides. And number 4, and this is the critical confidence part, every single batch is third-party tested for over 200 harmful contaminants, things like heavy metals, etc. All you have to do if you are a neurotic nerd like me, you can even scan the QRI code on the back of the product to get the third-party independent laboratory test results. That's how much trust and confidence they place in their product. By the way, if you want a recommendation, go for the dark chocolate flavored protein powder. It's just exceptional. In fact, it's wonderfully addictive. I didn't just say that. Anyway, it delivers 21 grams of protein per serving. And for folks of my podcast right now, you can save 20%. So go over to peori.com/Matt Walker, and that is spelled PUORI.com, Matt Walker. So again, that is PUORI.com/Matt Walker, and you will get 20% off your product.
All right, next question. Why do I sometimes jolt awake just as I'm falling asleep? It's a great one.
Yeah. It sounds like a crazy 60s flower power kind of like dance regimen, but they're called hypnagogic jerks. And yeah, if someone's being really unkind to you, you can just, as a sleep scientist, you're just being such a hypnagogic jerk to me. Stop doing that. Anyway, I'm just not funny. Stop it, Matthew. So getting back to it, we know, as I said, they have a name, this jolting awake, this kind of, whoa, and the body jerks, as it were. They're called hypnic jerks or hypnagogic jerks. It's where you get a sudden involuntary muscle twitch. It's not really a muscle twitch. For most people, it's a whole body kind of like convulsion. And if you're, lucky enough to have a bed partner and you all of a sudden do that, there's no hiding of what just happened. When your bed partner wakes up and you're like, why did you just do that? There's no amount of, what do you mean? What happened? I didn't do anything. It's just so obvious. You just had one of those and everyone has experienced them and you can't get away from them. And it's 2 stripes of no confidence in a relationship. But nevertheless, what causes it? Several explanations. One is a sort of a brain to body transmission misfire that as you transition from wakefulness to sleep, your motor system begins to relax. And sometimes the brain misinterprets this relaxation as a sign that you are not supported against the forces of gravity by this thing called your mattress. And so all of a sudden, you get this loss of what we call proprioception, this sensation of where your body is in space and also how it's supported. And at that point, you get this all of a sudden break glass in case of emergency response, which was, I'm falling. And then you get that. Have you ever had, talking about looking uncool, which I think I've got a PhD in that too, but have you ever had the experience where you're walking along a street and you're about to step off, you're talking to someone, you're about to step off the sidewalk down onto the road and cross the road. And all of a sudden, as you're putting your foot down, you're expecting the pavement to meet your foot and it hasn't met it yet. And at some point you get this really ugly sort of wobble where and your hands kind of go out in the way. What this tells us is something remarkable. That your brain, even though you're having a conversation, has subconsciously understood the speed and the velocity at which you're moving. It's calculated the depth of the drop-off from the pavement onto the road itself. It's understood the computational time that it should take from time of stepping off to time of foot landing. And if the delta, the difference, the change in that time is not accurate, and your foot doesn't hit at the moment of its expected grounding, it sends an error signal back up through your spinal cord to your brain and says, oh my goodness, we've miscalculated this. Panic. Is it just me, Eti, or have you ever had that kind of like, oh?
It happened
Strange.
to me many times. And also when you sit at a chair and you expect it to be at a certain height and it's not, and
I know, I'm
there's no
clapping.
way you can hide that
Yeah.
collapse. There's no
No,
way.
I don't care how cool you are. You could be Ryan Gosling, Brad Pitt, you could be George Clooney, you could be as cool as all of them. At that point, I'm sorry, any shred of dignity that you had has just
Lost.
been stripped from you within seconds. And this is what happens essentially with these hypnagogic jerks that normally, as we're transitioning into sleep, we are losing conscious perception, including the conscious perception of our bodies in space. Sometimes the conscious descending down into sleep lags a little bit behind the turning off of our body sensing. So our body sensing starts to get turned off quicker than the quote unquote anesthesia of sleep starts to kick in, and we're still aware of it. So all of a sudden we say, oh my goodness, body not supported. I've lost my signals of feedback up my spinal cord to my brain to tell me I'm being supported. I'm not being supported anymore. You are. It's just that the signals have been stopped because normally that's what the body does as it's transitioning into sleep, and you get a hypnic jerk or a hypnagogic jerk. So should you be worried? No. Hypnagogic jerks, they're completely normal. They affect actually about 70% of people. There's a great survey done by the American Academy of Sleep Medicine, I think back in 2014, to prove that. If they become very frequent and disruptive, it may be an indication that you may want to go and see someone. But if it's happening once a week, but if it's happening, multiple times every single night, then maybe you need to just go have a chat with someone.
I love how this question corresponds with the previous one, where we're seeing going into sleep and these little discrepancies between motor disconnection, sensory disconnection, and then that hypnagogic jerk. And then we were seeing with the other question about paralysis coming out of sleep, the exact same kind of delay. So we're actually seeing how complex and beautiful this process of falling in sleep and falling out of sleep and waking up usually transitions so smoothly, but we sometimes get those little delays coming in and going out that tells us how many things are actually happening in order for us to fall asleep and wake up.
Notice your vernacular and your nomenclature. What did you just call it at the start of the night as a process? You called it falling asleep.
Falling asleep, yeah.
And there lies a beautiful description. It's the notion that we are falling down into sleep. And sometimes the sensation of falling, which is normally not consciously aware, becomes consciously aware, and that's the hypnic jerk. And then, as you said, this beautiful mirror image, that the same beautiful symmetry and balletic synchrony of conscious awareness and body perception, those two things normally have to be perfectly synced, falling into sleep. And you use the lovely word, falling out of sleep. I much prefer that because I'm such a sleep biased person and I'm so biased against wakefulness, I guess it seems. So I'd like to call it falling asleep and falling out of sleep rather than falling asleep and waking up. But anyway, you're right. This demonstrates to us that it's actually not an easy thing to do. And occasionally when it goes wrong, you really understand how, it's like a refrigerator compressor. Have you ever been in a kitchen? When the refrigerator compressor goes off, it's only then that you understand it's been on all of the time.
Yeah.
And it's like that with these things. It's like that in biology. Sometimes we don't marvel enough at biology and physiology and what it does. And it's only when it becomes absent or abnormal that we recognize how brilliant and astronomical it is when it's present. It's only when it switches off do we understand and appreciate how powerful it is when it is being switched on. Very good point.
It's like when we only realize we're healthy when we become sick.
Yeah, I think the phrase is often that the person on the street has 1,000 dreams and wishes, and the person in the hospital bed has only one. I think we often forget that it's very hard to return to that state of humbleness and consistent appreciation because life is, once you jump over the guardrail and you're down into the torrent, life will whisk you away. And, you rarely tend to put much thought into how amazing it is to be in health. And when you are not in health, how much you would give of any
Hmm.
fortune or most anything to not be without health. But let's try seeing if we can end on a less sobering note. Do we have another question before we end?
Yes, yes. Why sometimes I wake up with a song stuck in my head? Hmm. Happens to me a lot.
Yeah, I think in America they call it an earworm. It is basically what we describe in psychology involuntary musical imagery. That's what it's called. And it is surprisingly common upon awakening. It's common enough that I think it deserves an explanation, but right now we don't really have any, I don't think, fantastic data. I think one of the theories that probably I cleave to the most is the memory consolidation during sleep theory, just because I've done a lot of work in that area myself, and so I'm biased. But the brain is processing recent experiences during sleep and it's reinforcing those memory traces. So this idea that if you've been listening to like that song that you've just discovered and you've been listening it on repeat, or it's been a song that you've known and you've known a long time, and all of a sudden it comes back on the radio and you haven't heard it for a long time, it sort of reactivates that memory trace. And your brain may keep it on repeat or just keep it on the boil for a little bit longer overnight. And therefore, when you wake up in the morning, because it's re entered your memory architectural space because of its recent reemergence in your life, or you've just been laying down that new, fresh memory trace with a new song that you've discovered over and over again. Both of those things are strengthened and re strengthened at night. It may then lead to this sense of it always being there when you first wake up in the morning, because that's been the thing that's been processed and rehearsed most significantly at night. There is a little bit of evidence, can't remember the name, but regarding REM sleep and music processing, they've argued that I think, and if you look at the MRI scans, I think quite rationally so, that the areas of the brain associated with music processing, which are the auditory cortex and what we call the hippocampus, which is a memory structure, they are very active during REM sleep. And as I said, I think earlier in the show and on our last AMA, when we wake up the next morning, we typically are waking up out of REM sleep, or which is dream sleep, or out of light and non-REM sleep. So if your music processing areas, the auditory cortex and the hippocampus, are more active during REM, and it's from that musically processing network space that you're being woken up from, should you be waking up from REM sleep, then no wonder it's going to be music and familiar music that you are waking up to. I think there's some other things out there regarding unfinished cognitive loops that people have tried to argue that unfinished tasks linger in our memories longer. I think most people, for the songs that they hear as an earworm, they've probably been played to death rather than they stop listening just before the end. And therefore, the earworm is reflective of their brain trying to solve the unfinished task. So I've never really believed in that theory very much. But how to stop it if you want to, I don't know, listen to a different song, reset your auditory memory, engage in something that's mentally absorbing like a puzzle solving, chew gum. I don't know. I truly don't think there's been any really great data on how to break that cycle. But right now, I think the money for me is probably on the very intense memory processing functions of REM sleep, and the fact that music is unlike experience and unlike the conversation that everyone is listening to between you and I. If you're unlucky, you will only hear it once. And if you're really unlucky, you will hear it maybe twice. With songs, we put them on repeat. So the etching of that memory trace into the brain is so much stronger. And therefore, if we are doing memory processing and memory reactivation during sleep, no wonder those memories of music, which are so repetitively scored into the neural architecture, may therefore be the things that we wake up hearing the next day, combined with the fact that our hearing cortex and equipment is so much more activated during REM sleep. But again, I think that one is, I mean, I'm going out on a limb here in terms of explanations. Do you have anything more concrete, Etty?
Well, choose your tunes wisely, I think. Yeah, I think you're very right. Music is, especially music we love, we tend to listen to so many times. And have you ever had the experience that a song you haven't heard in years comes on, and you're like, oh my God, I know the lyrics to this one. And you didn't even know that it was
Yeah,
hidden somewhere in your brain for decades.
it's
Like,
amazing, isn't it? And
why
what
do I
that
hold
tells
on to
us,
this information?
yeah, firstly, all of those synapses wasted. But the other thing that tells you is something really important about memory. And it's something that I think is quite profound that we also don't appreciate. It's the difference between availability versus accessibility. So let's say that availability and accessibility, think of it almost like dreams themselves. I think all of us have woken up knowing that we were dreaming, and you can almost grab the dream. But the harder you try, it sort of all of a sudden starts to dissolve and you just can't get it. You can't get it. And you assume, I just forgot my dream. But then maybe later that evening, when you come back home and you're showering, or a few days later, you look at the shampoo bottle and the label of it all of a sudden triggers the unlocking of the memory. And all of a sudden, the dream comes flooding back to you. What that means is that the dream was not forgotten. The dream was always there, it was always available, it just wasn't accessible because you had lost the IP address to it. And you needed something to come along, like the radio playing the song again, or like the shampoo bottle triggering the dream recall, and to do a bit of a nudge, nudge, wink, wink. Oh, by the way, do you remember this? And all of a sudden, you had forgotten the IP address. It was there, but you couldn't access it because you'd lost the location of it. And these things trigger the reemergence of our connection with the location of it. And so accessibility gets translated to availability. It was there all along. It was accessible, but you just lost the address to it. So it wasn't available. That's one of the beauties of memory, I think. But anyway, sorry, I've gone a bit too far afield. And with that mental memory mnemonic gymnastic profundity complete, we will bid you a good night. I hope that whatever music enters your mind tomorrow morning, that it is deeply pleasing and fully joyful. From the two of us here, we wish you good sleep. Take care. We will see you in the next episode. Eti, any goodbyes?
Sleep well and enjoy your music.
Take care, folks. Bye for now.